Business fables are all the rage. People can learn a lot more from a story than from a lecture, a dry lecture. And today we're going to learn how to write one of those business fables so you can get your points across so that it will be easily remembered. Hi, I'm Dan Janal, the author of Write Your Book in a Flash and more than a dozen other books. I'm a book coach, developmental editor, and ghostwriter. And no matter where you are in the writing process, I can help you write your book. Our guest today is Jeff West. He's written a number of business fable books, including his latest, Streetwise to Saleswise, Becoming Objection-Proof and Beat the Sales Blues. Welcome, Jeff.
Such an honor to be with you today, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. You're such a well-renowned author that the pleasure is all mine. It's great to see you here. Let's start off from the very beginning. Why business fables? Why should business people or healthcare professionals write a business fable book instead of the traditional book on how to overcome problems or such, written in that kind of way? Mm-hmm.
That's such a great question. And the topic in general is something I just love to discuss. I love good how-to books. I really do. I've gotten a lot out of them over the years that have helped me build a successful business, a successful career. And I also love good fiction. And when you write a business fable, you're getting the joy of combining both. So as the author, I find it one of the most fun things I can do. When I'm writing just the how-to books, for me, it can be a little bit less enjoyable, I guess is the best way to say it. I still enjoy doing it, but it's a little bit less enjoyable. But when I can take that material and just spin a really great tale with it, it just makes me happy. And there's a reason that it works. And it's one of the reasons that it's kind of been my chosen genre as far as my writing career goes. And it goes back to something simple that happens in our brains. And very few people will dive into the neurology of the brain and how people retain lessons or how people make comfortable decisions. And as I left the insurance industry 10 years ago, that was one of the areas that I studied because I was starting to write and I wanted to know why certain decisions got made. And what I discovered, and this will be way too boring to go over on this podcast, but I'll tell you that if anyone really wants to know about it, they should study the works of Dr. Antonio Damasio. He's a professor of neuroscience at USC and an adjunct professor at the Salk Institute. But basically, all decisions get made with a combination of logic and emotion. The part of our brain that generates the logic communicates with a part of our brain that creates emotion. Those two come together and they combine and they produce a result. And if it's a positive emotion connecting with logic, the result is to be comfortable moving forward, to say yes to whatever's in front of you. It's a process I teach in a sales process when I'm working with companies on their sales teams. But the interesting thing about that is the same works in how we retain a lesson. When we read a how-to book, when we hear a lecture, we get information and we retain some of it. We really do, especially if you're taking notes and all that. But when you can combine a story that will grab your reader, that will touch their heart, that will entertain them, and at the same time, you weave in the principles that you would have taught in the how-to book, what happens is the experience becomes something they retain at a higher level. They will retain more because it's using both sides of their brain. It's using the emotional creator part of the brain as well as the logical part of the brain. And it truly makes a difference in retention. And that's why anybody's doing, even if you're writing a great how-to book, and Dan, I know you're a great writer and you coach people this way, the stories that you can put in there are really powerful in getting your reader to understand that lesson. And that's why I've gone that way.
Perfect. And I do instruct all of my clients to start their chapters with a story that leads into what they're going to learn and then go into the logic of the learning. And it seems to work very, very well. So which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do you have the content first or do you have a great story first?
In my case, I'm usually thinking about the content first. Whether I'm co-authoring or I'm doing my own book, I'll think about the principles that I want to teach. I'll make an outline. I'll have some things listed that I know, okay, these are the principles that I want to teach. So I start there. And then I let the story basically reveal itself to me almost organically. I'll give you an example. The principles in the latest book, Streetwise to Saleswise, come from a good friend of ours, yours and mine, Bob Berg, who had some material on becoming objection proof years ago. And what that was the content that we were going to turn into the parable. And my wife and I were actually sitting in New Orleans on, it was somewhere around late December 2022. And it was, we were having dinner. It was a good area. We were up on a balcony of a restaurant, kind of looking out over the street, and an absolutely wonderful street entertainer began to sing down there. And we sat there another hour just listening to her. And as we sat there, Dan, the entire storyline for the new book came to me. It revealed itself. And as John David Mann, who's my writing coach, as you know, he's a tremendous author. And he says he loves to let it, sometimes he'll start with an outline, but he'll let the story take him wherever it wants to go. And sometimes he can't wait for the story to reveal itself to him, because it's almost like watching a good movie if you do it right, because you're not even knowing necessarily what's coming next, and you just let it happen, and you have an outline and you have a purpose that you're doing. But the creation of the fiction is my favorite thing.
Well, I noticed that in your book, there are a lot of references to New Orleans and the food, restaurants, certain words that only people in New Orleans would know, and, really deep down stuff that you wouldn't find in a travel guide.
Right, absolutely.
Which made the story even more interesting. So I'm wondering, how much information can you pack into a business fable before it gets to be too much? I know from reading other business fable books, there are like maybe 5 or 6 key points. Is there a rule of thumb or just a general guide on how much is too much and how little would be too little?
I don't know that it's formulaic in my case, but I do think you can overdo it. It would be better to underplay that than to overplay it, in my view, because in my view, I want the story to be so darn good that people can't put it down. And when the book is something that they have a hard time putting down, and they'll tell me, they'll fuss at me sometimes because they'll start it late and then they'll not be able to put it down. That's the reaction that I'm going for. And then I want to put the lessons in there in such a way that the lessons come almost organically, as if you're really sitting in the world that person's sitting in, and you're learning these things and the conversations that would happen as someone does that. And so for me, somewhere around 5 to 7 principles is about as much as I want to put in there. There can be more as long as it's organically coming from the narrative, but the specific things that you're going to teach, you have to be a little bit careful. And I think Streetwise to Saleswise pushed that envelope just a little bit, but we worked it into the narrative so much in such a way that it became part of the narrative, and it was someone learning from that rather than, okay, this is a point I'm getting and I need to make sure I remember this. And so what I did in that case is I combined the narrative. And then when it was the key points, I had my hero making notes, and you could see the notes that he was making in the book, and that kind of helped make that work. But my opinion is underdo that rather than overdo it. So 5 to 7 is normally plenty.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I noticed that your story included like a love story as well, and there are ups and downs and ins and outs. You had a lot of twists and turns in there to keep people going, just like you would in a regular novel. So, do you use a 3-act formula or any other kind of model or template in storytelling to write your books, or is it completely, seat of the pants?
First off, thank you for the compliment. What you've just said about how it worked, that's one of the highest compliments you could ever pay me as the author. So thank you. In my case, I don't know that I'm not one of these people who doesn't do an outline. I'll hear some authors like Lee Child. You guys know Lee Child, who wrote the Jack Reacher series. He says he never works from an outline. But then when you hear him talk about his process, even though it may not be a written out outline on his computer or on his tablet, it is definitely an outline in his head as he's going through the story. It doesn't mean that the outline handcuffs you, but he does that. In my case, I generally start with an outline, and I'll decide, okay, this is once I have the story concept in my head, the story arc, I'll have an outline with that. But again, I do not let the outline handcuff me. And mine, as a rule, or as a general rule, I guess, would be that I like to start the main character in a bit of an unexpected problem, and let them work through that problem, get mentoring in many cases with that problem. Then I try to throw something in, I don't know, somewhere around 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through, that was totally unexpected, that bites the reader just a little bit, and then brings them back out. As one of the great, I don't remember whose quote this is, and I'm embarrassed that I can't give proper attribution, but one of the greatest quotes about the hero's journey, maybe John David Mann that said this to me. He said, you want to have a hero that people can see that's flawed, that also is someone they could see liking, even though they are flawed. And then you want to get them up in a tree, throw rocks at them for a while, and then bring them safely back down. And that tends to be how I do things.
Okay, great. Let's talk about characters. How do you create your characters? Because I know that in your latest book, there's the character, your main character, and the mentor, and his love interest, and her parents, and a few other characters, like minor characters, like the restaurant owner and such like that. How do you create those characters, and how much detail do you give them?
I give them much more detail than will ever show up in the book when I'm in the creation process.
Mhm.
I spend the first, and I don't rush my process as an author. I spend the first 3 months usually doing research and character outlines, character synopsis in my head. And so when I get to the actual characters, what I will do is I will sometimes work in some of my own idiosyncrasies, my own flaws, my own uh, challenges, and my own successes. I'll work some of that into at least one of the characters or two of the characters. But what I also do, I'm an avid reader of books about personality styles. There was one I read years ago that I still love to go back to, and it's called Personality Plus. And it was just talking about the different personality types and how they respond in certain situations. And so then I'll start, and when I'm kind of putting my outline of the character together, I'll go so far as to do their history. The history will never make it into the book, but I'll say, okay, this is where they're from. This is how they grew up. This is the things they experienced. This is where they went to school. I mean, I'll get as detailed as I feel like getting at the time. But what it does, it gives me a flavor of them that when I'm later writing them into the storyline, it fits. And it gives them more of a depth. Even though I won't put all of that in there, it comes out in ways that it's almost subliminal. I don't want to say that. I guess it's wrong, but it comes out in ways that are unexpected. That's like in Streetwise to Saleswise, the female lead character, her dad is from Jamaica. And so as I was doing the processing of all of the character things, I started remembering some of my trips to Jamaica and some of the people that I met there. And I just kind of sketched out what I remember about them. And I was able to throw those things in the mix of the storyline. One of my favorite examples of that is my very first trip to Jamaica. I was on a bus going from the airport that was near Montego Bay to the resort we were staying at. And the guy on the bus that was the kind of, I won't say tour guide, but he was basically entertaining the bus and talking to everybody while we were going. And they had a cooler full of Red Stripe beer.
Mhm.
And he was about, this is the national beer of Jamaica, man. This is good. It's called Red Stripe beer. And he said, you see on this label, it says DG. You see the DG thing on the label? It says DG because it's damn good beer. And I just remembered that story. And so I sketched that. And I filtered that in through the storyline, but it gives it such color. If you go into a lot of detail, at least on your planning process about the character, oh, it gives you the ability to write flavor in there you can't get any other way.
Yeah, so being a world traveler and a studier of people can definitely, you bring your entire background into the book. There's a series of books. Uh, I know what it's called. They're thesauruses. One's the emotional uh, thesaurus, or the conflict thesaurus, or the urban living thesaurus, or and it's incredibly good. I actually interviewed the author on one of my podcasts, and because it goes into detail about how certain people would react under certain situations for something like empathy. What is empathy? How would you describe empathy? What would be it just gives you insights into the personality and the psychology that you just don't have because we live in our own little shells. When these people have studied lots of people, say, oh, here's how a person who has this would react in this situation. So it becomes fascinating. Jeff, can you point to any examples of books you've written or clients you've helped with business fables and how it's helped their businesses?
Sure. I've had my second book was called Said the Lady with the Blue Hair. And it was a book geared toward teaching lessons on business success. And the character was in the direct sales industry. And I have, over the years since that one came out, I have been brought into book signings and things with direct sales operations that were interested in having that done. And just the stories where people were coming by and telling me all the different things and how they had applied this or how it just meant something to them. Those were anecdotally some of my favorites. On the new one, I'm getting people who are ordering it in bulk, and because they're liking the lessons, they want to use it. I got tickled the other day. I spoke at a group of about 150 people in Houston. It's been probably almost a month now. And after that, I did a little coaching with them just as something that I wanted to do as extra help in teaching what I had taught them. And as I went through the thing, their bosses were calling me saying, thank you so much. I can't believe how much my people are getting out of this. And one of them even said, it's a lady who's a regional manager for a Fortune 500 insurance company. She said, I could tell them the same thing and they're not listening, but you tell them in this story, they're listening.
That's great. Jeff, how can people get in touch with you and how can they order your books?
The best way to just keep up with me is go to jeffcwest.com. As a matter of fact, while you're there, I've got a newsletter that I put out twice a week. It's got business and sales coaching as part of it. And if that's not your thing, it also has about every fourth post is something about my writing journey and in the writing process. So I think even if you're not in sales or in business, you'll get something out of that.
Jeff, thanks so much for joining us today, and thanks everyone for listening. We have more than 200 other episodes of Write Your Book in a Flash with Dan Janal on this YouTube channel. Check them out.